Greetings everyone, in this video we're going to be painting up some orcs, and I'll also be going over how to create some amazing textured, mottled and chipped armor, and these principles will also apply to any model that you want to paint and also in any colour. I'm Nate the Feral Painter and welcome to the video. Welcome back guys, and really quickly before we do dive into the video, there's just a few little things I want to go over. I don't normally go into my personal life and all that sort of stuff, but I've wanted to come on today and just update you all, because a lot of long-time viewers and followers of this channel, or even if you're new and just checking now and again, you'll know that I've not uploaded for quite some time. And for people that have followed and seen some of the statements that I've put out, I've been having some quite significant health issues at the moment and having some quite intense treatment, so that's the reason I've not been able to. I've just been so weak and just not had the energy to pick up a brush, and with moving some things about, I've not got my full setup. But you know, I've got a little bit of energy in between these treatments. I'm not sure how long for, so they are going to be a little bit sporadic, so please bear with me. But I did want a little bit of a palette cleanser, just something I could go in, have some fun, show you guys some fun techniques, and then take it from there. But I owe a massive, and I just want to say a huge thank you to every single one of you in this community that helped and supported what the Grimdark Compendium set up for me. I don't want to go massively into detail in these like personal things and all that stuff. It was just a quick update to tell you where I am and where I've been, and there will be a link in the description below if you want to check that out. You know, people are always asking how they can support me, and that's probably the best way. And also, if you can't do that, then simply really help me if you could help me get back on the YouTube train. It'd really help if you could just like, share and comment on this video to push it up that algorithm. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's dive straight into it. So we're going to paint up some orcs today. Now, you don't need an airbrush for this video. Everything that I'm going to show you, you can simply do with a brush, and you'll see a little bit later on in the video how you can adapt some of the airbrushing into just your standard brushwork. I'm simply doing it for speed. So I've primed it up in black. I've used the Kalido Colorworks primers, and there'll always be links below for any of the products that I use throughout this video, where you can go on and buy those products, and I just get a little bit of a kickback from that as well. But first of all, we want to be building up a rusty base coat or a rusty tone, because these are orcs, they're knackered, they don't really look after other equipment, and these are great for any Grimdark painters, and you can really have some fun with these products and just painting these guys up. You can go crazy with them, that, you know, they're meant to be out there and all that sort of stuff. So I've just got some Rhinox hide or curious leather, but it's just a Rhinox hide variant. But we're just going to build up some brown tones. So we're just going to get like a real simple rusty base coat attached to this miniature or painted onto this miniature, and then after this I'd choose, you don't have to use the specific brands that I'm using, as long as you've got like a dark brown, a medium brown and a bit more of like an orangey brown, and this will just act as a great undertone for your rusty base coat, and from there we can really start to have some fun. Now, once you've completed that rusty base coat, we can then move into painting the metallics. Now, this painting process is actually pretty quick to paint these orcs, and just by changing a few things and adding a couple of extra steps, you can really emphasize and take miniatures to the next level. But the next part is naturally the metallics and all the metals. Now, for this, you can, again, all I suggest is you get a dark silver and something like a bright silver. Now, I've gone for a tone that's, and again there'll be a paint list below, but I've gone for a tone that's got like a slight little tint of brown into it to keep showing that decay and that rust, and just, you know, these walking machines are just absolutely shattered to hell. And I'm just going to be doing this via dry brushing. So I start off with that darker tone first and just work my way around the model, just dry brushing this onto all the metal or the metallic sections. Don't worry too much about the areas, or even if you get a little bit on the areas that are going to be like the painted sections or a coloured section, we're just going to dry brush these on. Now, the reason I am using a dry brush is, one, it's going to pick out all those edges, and it's going to leave behind and into those crevices that rusty base tone showing through, suggesting that these metal legs and all the mechanical parts on this model are absolutely shattered to hell. But once you've worked your way around on that first colour, it's then when you come in with that slightly brighter tone to then work your way around and just highlight some of those sections and really push them up. You can leave some sections in that rusty brown tone if you wanted to, or even just like get some of the edges to really suggest some corrosion. And again, this comes down to you and the look that you desire for your model. But just work your way around, get all those metals dry brushed on there. You can do this pretty quick. I think it only took me a few minutes just to, even a model of this size, just to get all those on. And just the end result, just that alone, can look really effective. And again, with these videos that I give you, I know I go in and give you loads of little hints and tips and lots of different techniques, but hopefully you can come out of this and pick and choose which one of those techniques you want. You might want to skip some sections and just add or paint it in a preferred way that you want, and just slightly use some of the techniques that I've taught in this video. Now, this portion of the video is probably the main section of the video and the main technique that I wanted to go over for this. Now, this effect is one of my favorites to get like some mottled and chipped armor, but we're going to be doing this using like contrast paints, but we need to get like a base coat down first of all. Now, you could do this with just like a black or your grays, building it up to white for your highlights, or alternatively, because I'm going to be doing some yellow and I want those warm undertones, it's always best to build up from like a red or a magenta or a pinkish color up to white, because then that gives you those warm tones once we start to add those contrast paints. Now, this technique will also work, like I've just mentioned right at the beginning of this video, for any model or armor or anything like that that you want to paint. So if you want to do a space marine and you just want to build it up in the grays to the white, you could go over it with a blue to get like an ultramarine color, or a green to get your dark angels, and you'll see how versatile it is. But changing slightly those undertone mixes can dramatically change the overall color. So maybe if you're going to do like an ultramarine, you might start with a purple, building up to white, and then go over it with a blue, and it'll slightly change that tone. This is for you to experiment and try it yourself. Now, the next main part of this to make this effect work is by using some sponge. Now, you'll saw right at the beginning I did use a little bit bigger sponge that a lot of people tend to use these days, but that gives you different marks. Now, it's these marks that really sell this effect. So if you've ever got some to hand, you can do it with a brush as well. So if you've not got any of these, you can also achieve this effect with a brush. And for some smaller sections and harder to reach areas, I did actually go in and stipple on with a brush. But ultimately, you'll notice you get some finer marks using these sponges. Now, this sponge, this foam that I'm using right here, is just from the Games Workshop, the Forge World models. It comes in the packaging, and I've got tons of it. And I just tear a little bit off, grab it with some tweezers or some clips, and then you can just dab it in your paint and start to dab it onto the miniature. A cheaper alternative way, which I always suggest, is go to your local store, go to the place where you can buy like car washing equipment and all that stuff. Buy one of those cheap, yellow, nasty, horrible 99p or $1 sponge. Sometimes you can get like a pack of 3 for £1, depending on where you shop. And then that'll last you so long. It'll last you near almost a painting life if you tend to do this effect. But, you know, it's those little tiny marks that we're after. Now, all I'm doing is just building this up like I would with a brush, but just using stippling. I've started off with like a deep red, building it up to magenta, and then I just keep adding little bits of white to it as we build up. You will notice that I do leave behind, especially near the edges, some of that darker, rustier base coat that we put in first of all. But what we want to do is pay more attention to like the central parts if you're going for light volumes, or areas what are going to naturally be a little bit lighter is where you want to be adding your white. But take your time with this section, because this is what's really going to sell this effects, and you'll see when we go over it, it'll look a complete mess. When you first do it, you'll be like, oh my god, what am I doing to my model? But trust the process, and you'll see as we get into the contrast paints or adding the color over the top, this is where that effect really sells. Now, if you did want, you can go back in with your bolts and rivets, and don't be scared. If you've done an area a little bit too bright, you can always go back in with that original darker color just to tone everything a little bit further down. And if you really want to get some smooth transitions with it, you can work your way up, and it's just a case of, you know, really adding it up in small amounts, dotting it on, adding a little bit more white, dotting it on, and doing it that way. But once that's all on there and dried, what we're then going to do is, I used Iron Jawz Yellow, and then you can use, again, like I've mentioned, if you, depending on what model you're doing this on, you can go over this in whatever effects that you desire. But all I'm going to do is load it up in my airbrush. The reason I've used an airbrush is because it does go on there a lot smoother. You can get away with doing this via a brush as well. It might just need a couple of layers, and just build it up in small, slower layers, and then you'll see that a nice effect going on there as well. But I like to airbrush mine. I don't really worry about any overspray too much, because we've not painted too much on at this point, and if any of that yellow hits some of that original rust tone around it, it's just going to emphasize that rusty base coat. So just to quickly recap all of that, it's the sponges that we want to get the different marks, because these will leave different marks to different sponges or brushes. And we're just going to add, you can use the greys or introduce a color variant, especially like this with a yellow, like the red, and slowly keep adding white from your darkest color, building it up slowly over time. And then once it's dry, you can go over it with a contrast paint, sit back and enjoy those results. Once that has dried, I did just go back in with a little bit more sponge chipping, but you can see that real worn effect now and how it's worked up, and those warmer tones are because we've put that magenta on, and because we put yellow over the top, it turns to a nice little orange. But this effect for me is, it just looks so good because the marks are so small, it really looks in scale. But at this point, I've just got a little bit more Rhinox hiding, and I just wanted some of those edges just to be a little bit more battered up. And you could probably get away doing this before you even put yellow contrast paints on, but I really wanted these to be like a dark brown. But I'm just going across some of those edges that are naturally going to be dinked up a little bit more, and just tapped in a couple more chips just to really sell that effect. You can go back in with a brush as well, especially around some of the weld beads and weld marks, just to really tie and bring everything together. But again, I will just emphasize the versatility of this sponging effect with the contrast paints and just building it up. You don't always have to use the magenta. I'd only recommend that if you're going to be doing like a yellow. So if you want to do like the fist guys, I don't know why the names just escape me, but you know what I mean. And again, feel free to change these up for a different effect. If you want like a colder tone, you may use a different color as well. After this, it's just a case, I've not gone massively into detail with painting this miniature and this model. It were these effects that I really wanted to fetch to this video, but I just went in there and painted everything else up. And there's not many colours, it was just a little bit of red and some additional metallic colours. Also, the actual orc himself, I am going to be doing a separate video on how to paint up an orc with a skin and everything, so make sure you are hitting that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on that if you wanted to see my colour recipe for painting up some orcs. But all I've done at this point is just work my way around the model and just made sure that I have painted and added anything in there before we move on to the next stage. Now for the next stage, at this point you can add some vinyls or some decals, but because they're orcs, I wanted these to be a little bit more funny and just make this machine look really worn and as though these guys have not been bothered and just painted on the markings themselves, which is, if you're looking at them and think, God, that looks terrible, it's purposeful. Well, that's what I'm going to tell you anyway. It's just that I couldn't do it, but you know, I'll tell you it's purposeful, but the effect looks all right anyway. But I just went in there with a little bit of paint and just added and wrote on some funny markings or some symbols. Again, this is entirely up to you. Even if you don't want to add them, you don't have to do that at this point. At this point, I cracked open some oil paints and some mineral spirits. I'd recommend the villainy ones, the anti-death. It's the safest one with the lowest odor. And all I've done is load up some black, and then I've got myself a couple of rust tones. Now for the black, or you can even like mix a little bit of brown in there if you want to get like a bit more of a rust tone. All I'm going to do is water them down into a wash consistency. and all I'm going to do is just tap and dab around rivets and bolts and panel lines, and this will just help emphasize and give a little bit of contrast to everything else. But this is just really fun. It's a nice little stage, and you'll notice you don't need to put any varnishes or anything for them to wick it in, because it's already got quite a lot of capillary action on there anyway. And sometimes you do get like a little bit of staining around bolts where like the oil's like dissipated around it. Now normally you can clean these up with a little bit of mineral spirits, but for this I just left it because it's an orc. It'd make sense that, you know, it's all oily and stainy and just a complete mess. They're not going to look after it or take it for a detail or anything like that, are they? And then for the rust tones, it was just a case of dotting these on and then actually using a thinner brush just to turn these into some streaks. But this stage is just to add a little bit of contrast and a slight hint of some rust streaks. We're not going to go full blown with the rust just yet. That's in the next section. But just take your time with this, just work your way around those bolts and some of those rust streaks, and then you'll really start to see that effect coming together. And the beauty of using oils, you can, if you want, use your traditional acrylic washers if you want. But the reason I like to use oils is just because of their working time, and it allows me to manipulate them a little bit further. And if I make any mistakes and anything like that, I can just simply completely erase them and then just go back in there and retry and do it again. Now for some of the heavier rusted sections, I'm going to turn to Dirty Down's Rust. Now if you've never used this product, my god, is it magic in a bottle. It looks like real rust, goes on like real rust, and it's just so good. So some little tips around Dirty Down's Rust is make sure that you are giving that bottle a hell of a shake, because the sediment and all the pigment and stuff tends to sit down at the bottom of the bottle. So just give it a real good shake, make sure it's all mixed up. If you've got a vortex mixer, I'd recommend that as well. Now all I'm doing is going in with a brush, a slightly damp brush, and with Dirty Down's Rust, sort of the rule of thumb is if the thicker you put it on, the darker the rust tones will be, and the lighter or the more water you add to it, the lighter those rust tones can be as well. If you've never used it, I would recommend practicing on a test piece, because it can be a little bit unpredictable, this product, but overall the results that you get from it, once it starts to dry, and it does dry very quickly, so be careful. And then and again, just like you can with oil paint, you can go back in with water with this and start to manipulate it even further. But I just apply this on, stipple it on just randomly, and like oil paints, you can erase it if you want with just a lot of water. But again, just be really careful. But then some other little hints and techniques that you can do with it. Once you've put a thick layer on, what I like to do sometimes is just go back in and either stipple some water in there just to get a bit of colour variation. You'll get tons of rust cut tone variation with this product. Or what you can do is actually get a bit of a bigger brush and start to spatter and flick some paint onto, some water onto there, and that'll dissolve some of that pigment, further turning and giving you some more tones. Now just work your way around and apply this wherever you like. It's such a fun product, you can go really overboard and heavy with it. Again, this is entirely up to you and the results that you are after. But once you've done that, all I did was just come back with a bright silver and just highlight some of those edges as though it's been scuffed and it's like fresh bare metal underneath that's not corroded. And also I did that onto the weld beads as well. Now the last thing I did on this model, and I've included it in this video just to show you and give you some tips of it. It didn't quite work out as well as I'd hoped. I should have gone slightly brighter with everything, but I wanted like a heat engine effect. I'm not sure if you've ever seen like brakes or an engine when it's super hot and you can see it's almost turning molten, and that's sort of what I'd wanted for these boys, because they're just absolutely nuts, especially around the engine bay and some of the pipes. Like some of they just really pushed this engine to the max and it was constantly overheating, but for whatever reason it's still working, as orcs tend to do. But I've included it, but I wish I'd have gone a little bit brighter with it. But a way to get this effect is, first of all, I went in with some white just to make everything pop, so that the colour that we go over the top of it, it just really makes that pop. So we're just going to go in there with some white with an airbrush or a sponge or however you're going to paint this. And then I got Radiation Glow by Army Painter, or some sort of really bright luminous orange paint. I've not quite found some. I think I'm going to switch to some inks and try this effect a little bit more, maybe for some Legion of the Damned or something. And then I went in there and did that, got a little bit of red, and then just to dull down some of those effects. And this is probably where I went a little bit too wrong. Now, to really sell this effect is what we're going to do first of all is get a dark red and dry brush it over those areas that we've just put that bright orange. Then after that, we're going to get our black or a darker brown and go over the top. And then if you want to put some steel over the top of that as well, you can do. So just to recap, it's white, your plasma glow or your really bright orange effects, a little bit of red just to dull it down as all that heat's concentrated into some areas, and then start to dry brush over it with some red, and then go back over it with some black. I will probably do a complete separate video on how to achieve this effect a little bit better, but I have included it just to show you. But maybe just don't go as like dark with the red, and just make that all pop a little bit more. But hopefully next time I'll nail that effect, but I did include it in the video because yeah, those YouTubers do make mistakes. And that brings us to the end of this video. Now I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope you've been able to take something away, mainly that chipped, that mottling armor effects, and you can see how we've weathered some of those additional things on the top. But I've been Nate the Feral Painter. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please remember to hit that like button, share button, and all links and everything will be below. And as always, I'm not sure when I'll be back. I'm going to be editing another one, so there might be one in a couple more weeks, which is the orc skin effects, or even next week, or in a few days. I'm not quite sure. It depends how I feel. But again, massive thank you to everyone. And as always, I will catch you in the next video.